Today is Mother's Day. So if you're a mom or you've served as a mothering figure to someone through your love and companionship, know that today we celebrate you. Well, because it's Mother's Day, I'll be doing something that I do pretty much every Mother's Day. I'll be celebrating my wife and the way she serves as a mother to our kids, but I'll also spend part of today giving thanks for my mother, Pamela Ray Messer. This short, red-headed woman full of vigor and spunk and humor. Part of my day today will be spent recalling memories that are fond, memories that will make me laugh. Part of today will even include recalling hard memories, memories that will likely make me cry. But more than any of that, I'll be thinking about the memories with my mom in which she imparted wisdom to me. She had so many lessons that have stuck with me. I can remember one of the earliest ways in which she imparted wisdom. I was in kindergarten and I had just signed up for T-ball, so the time had come for me to purchase my very first metal bat. Not the cheap stuff for little kids. I mean a genuine aluminum bat with a real baseball. I couldn't wait to get in the backyard and take some swings at that baseball. Well, my mother told me before I could get in the backyard with that bat and ball, "Son, I need you to be very, very careful. If your younger sister is anywhere close to you, don't even think about swinging that bat. If you hit her, that'll be the end of baseball for you." And I was like, "Oh yeah, Mom, no worries, I'll be careful." And she's like, no, look me in the eye. Promise me you'll be careful. And I said, "Oh, sure." And I rushed out the door into the backyard and started swinging that bat, and sure enough, started throwing the ball to myself to try to make contact, and it wasn't 2 minutes into me trying out my new bat that I whiffed on a ball but made contact with my sister with her head. Well, she erupted in tears and wailing, and before you knew it, my mother burst out of the house. I swear she didn't even open the back door. She just floated through the door with eyes blazing with anger, and she gathered up my sister, consoled her, had one eye on me, and as she used those words to comfort her and see if she was okay, she looked at me and said, "What did I tell you about being careful with that bat?" And I would respond, "Well, Mom, it wasn't my fault. I tried." And she would interrupt me and said, "I told you if she was anywhere close, don't swing the bat. You could hurt her permanently. We could have to take her to the hospital." And I just would reply, "Mom, I'm sorry. It wasn't my fault. I just was throwing the ball up and tried to swing, and she ran up behind me and I couldn't see her." And my mom just looked at me and said, "Son, it's quite simple. Do not swing the bat if she's anywhere close. Honestly, God gave you a brain. Use it." I heard that proverb quite a bit growing up. Sometimes it would come in that form. Sometimes it would come in the form of, "Use the brain God gave you, son." You know what's interesting about that saying that I first heard in kindergarten is that it's stuck with me in a way that its value has only grown. It really didn't diminish in significance at all, but as my life has grown more complex, so has the richness of that proverb. Whenever I've been in religious contexts or listened to people with political power, when they've tried to convince me to believe something out of the sheer force of their speech and their own certainty, I could hear that voice in my mind saying, "God gave you a brain. Use it. Think for yourself." Or whenever I've been in a situation where I've been overcome with an impulse to act a certain way, I can hear the voice say, "Use the brain God gave you. Think before you act." You know, that's often the way wisdom works. In a very real life situation, someone who has weathered the test of time and grown mature in the process chimes in with some wise word that brings new light to the situation, insight that makes a light bulb go off in your mind. That's the book of Proverbs. It's full of these wise sayings that came to someone right at the right time, from someone who was quite wise and internalized these sayings as guides in their own life. Did you know Proverbs is one of the 3 great wisdom books in the Hebrew Bible? It's Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. I love each of those 3 books for very different reasons, but Proverbs has a unique place in my heart. Now, let me tell you, it's not because how easy it is to read through Proverbs. I mean, reading through Proverbs is a chore. Have you ever tried? If you haven't, I don't recommend it. It's just so much repetition and so many little bits of insight that's just over and over and over. There's no plot. There's no overarching argument that unfolds. There's no common theme that brings it all together, so it's hard to slog through. Well, at least the beginning and the end of Proverbs is interesting. If you're going to read Proverbs, read the beginning and the end first. I love how the book is bookended. At the beginning, you have this larger-than-life figure in this longer set of poems. She's wisdom personified, and she speaks to all of humanity on the earth, teaching them how to live. And then at the very end of the book, you have this mother who is imparting wisdom to her son, King Lemuel. And then right after that, we have this woman of valor that's held up as a shining example of what real embodied wisdom looks like. The beginning of end of Proverbs is really something. And if you're noticing that this wisdom book is bracketed by the wise voices of wisdom, then you're onto something. Perhaps the Bible is trying to tell us something about the nature of wisdom. Well, anyways, it's the middle of the book, the vast majority of the book of Proverbs, that's so difficult. These little short, little bits of Hebrew poetry about the length of a haiku that just gives you one after the other for 20 chapters. Here's a sample from chapter 10 of Proverbs. The memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the name of the wicked will rot. And then before you can take a breath, it goes right on in the next verse. The wise of heart will heed commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. And then it keeps right on going. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever follows perverse ways will be found out. I mean, can you imagine reading 20 chapters of that? It's nearly impossible. I think that's why the book of Proverbs has maybe diminished in value for the modern reader. But no, this has not always been the case. In fact, the opposite has been true. For generations of both Jewish and Christian people of faith, the book of Proverbs has been one of the most valued books of the Bible. But they wouldn't instruct their students by having them read through the book. No, they would pull from the Proverbs at specific times, in specific situations, and specific seasons of life. Like my mom imparting a proverb when I'm out practicing baseball in the backyard, a wise teacher would impart a wise saying from the book of Proverbs at just the right time to help them stay rooted in their values, to guide them in how to live at that particular time. My guess is that you know all too well what it's like to learn to live in that kind of way. Just living your life and all of a sudden someone with wisdom chimes in. I mean, think about this scenario. Has anyone ever wronged you, been quite mean to you, and all you want to do is just get back at them? And as you prepare to have your vengeance, a wise voice chimes in and says, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Or maybe you've been at school or at work and you're just not reaching that level of success that you so desperately want, and you're about ready to give up it. Then someone comes along and encourages you, saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Well, wisdom often gets absorbed when we hear from the book of Proverbs and the way it's been taught through the centuries. That's how wisdom guides us. But I love the way that the book of Proverbs describes wisdom. In the imagination of the ancient Hebrew poet, wisdom is more of a she than an it. Wisdom isn't this commodity that you can attain and then manipulate to your own ends. No, wisdom is more like a person with whom you have a lifelong relationship. Wisdom is like someone you approach with an open heart, a desire to love that person, a desire to learn from that person, a desire to accept the responsibilities of staying committed in relationship to that person. Walking with wisdom is like that. And the good thing about wisdom, as the Hebrew poet describes it, we don't have to look hard for wisdom. She's out in the public places, at the crossroads, at the city gates, wherever we are. She's out there crying to all of humanity, saying, listen to me. Here's what I have to say to you in the specifics of your life, in your situation. Here's how you can hold fast to your values. Here's how to live rightly. Listen to me. And so if in the particularities of your own situation right now, you don't have to listen hard, chances are you can already hear her voice. She's speaking. Now, in the passage that we heard read from Tom's family, wisdom is portrayed as this figure who's worth listening to. She's no Johnny-come-lately to creation. She was there at the very beginning. She says that before God did anything in creation, God gave birth to me. I am the firstborn of creation, you might say. She says that before God said, let there be light, before there were springs of water gushing forth, God gave birth to me. Before God set the mountains and the hills in place, God gave birth to me. There's this steady drumbeat of portraying God as this woman in labor giving birth to wisdom as the first act of creation. And then wisdom goes on to say that as God began to create the springs and the mountains and the hills and all of the vegetation and the creatures of the earth, I was there delighting in every step of creation. I was there playing with God in the beauty of it all, delighting with God in every bit of it. I was fully participating in creation. This is Lady Wisdom's way of telling us that you ought to listen to me. That in a very real way, if you abide by what I have to tell you, you will live with the grain of the universe. Now, I can teach you how to live life in the way that God imagines life to be lived in this place. But if you don't listen to my words, then you will live your life in a way that goes against the grain of the universe. It will bring friction. It will bring pain. So listen to me. My fingerprints are all over this place. I can teach you how to live in a way that you feel quite at home here. You know, I don't think it's coincidence that the book of Proverbs took its final form in the post-exilic period of Israel's life. After Israel as a kingdom collapsed, after its monarchy collapsed, its temple was destroyed, after all of that was gone and the people were exiled, after several decades, some returned with the heavy burden of trying to rebuild. In a time in which hope seemed hard, and seeing God's presence on the ground was even harder to see. In that context, the book of Proverbs became what we now know as the book of Proverbs. It seems like it was in this period of bewilderment, in this period of the hard realities of life, that they thirsted for the Proverbs' wisdom to help root them in a certain identity. They needed this hard-worn wisdom that had withstood the test of time to guide them, give them stability in unstable times. You know, I think it's in the peculiarity and the particularity of our time that Proverbs could be of particular value to us. Since Proverbs is addressed to specific people in specific situations, let's name the ways in which Lady Wisdom might talk to us in the specifics of our situation. We don't have to avoid it. We can name it out loud. We're living in the middle of a pandemic, and it's scary. We haven't lived through a pandemic on this scale since over 100 years ago. I mean, we've watched COVID-19 just swell and grow in China. We watched it spread across the world. We watched it spread to Washington State and to New York City and eventually to Nebraska, to Lincoln. And just 2 months ago, we didn't have a single case of COVID-19 here. And yet we had canceled services here at First-Plymouth. Other churches did. The school system shut down because we knew how dangerous this virus was. I mean, March Madness was canceled, for goodness sake. I mean, it was serious. We knew how easily transmittable this disease was, and we wanted to minimize its effectiveness at spreading. It was our way of caring for each other. Well, here we are 2 months later, and there are 606 cases here in Lancaster County as of last night. Half of those cases became known to us just in the last 7 days. I mean, this thing is exponentially increases. It's increasing now. And so if you're feeling worried, if you're feeling a little bewildered right now, it's because you're paying attention, not because you're being irrational. I think Lady Wisdom wants to speak to us in this kind of moment. Because we're hearing a lot of noise. We're hearing a lot of conflicting messages. And that's what's so hard about how to discern what it means to live rightly and wisely right now. I mean, just a few blocks from where I'm standing in a very tall building, there is someone with a lot of authority that gets up and talks almost daily in press briefings, who's telling us not to freak out, to be calm, but let's begin to reopen our society. That don't just look at the case numbers growing and growing and growing. Don't be so alarmed at that. Look over here. Look at how many ICU beds we still have available. Look at how many ventilators we still have available. It's okay. We really can begin to open things up under certain guidelines. It's time. Now, if you're feeling some uneasiness at that, that would make sense, because the reality is, I can't find, and I bet you can't find, a public health official who's trained in controlling infectious disease saying the same thing. No, if you're listening to those people, they are saying, no, case numbers rising is actually a metric that's worth paying attention to and being concerned over. That the ventilators and ICU capacity now reflects where our numbers were 2 to 3 weeks ago. What our ICU capacity and ventilator numbers will look like 2 to 3 weeks from now are based on our surging numbers now. It matters that this thing is growing. It matters that the positive rate is growing. There is cause for concern. There's no reason that we should begin to loosen our caution. Lady Wisdom, I think, is speaking in voices that you may be hearing inside of you right now, telling you, no, don't loosen your caution quite yet. No, the risk is still quite high, especially to those who are most vulnerable. I mean, the truth of the matter is, you know this, that the ones who are bearing the brunt of this are people in meatpacking facilities, those who are in long-term health facilities, those who are people of color disproportionately suffering fatalities from this disease, those who have underlying health conditions. I mean, the most vulnerable in our society are in fact being the worst hit by this virus. And so if you're feeling inside this uneasiness, opening up, having religious services even under certain guidelines, having restaurants open up fully even under certain guidelines, now all of this messaging, it just doesn't sit well. It's probably because you're hearing Lady Wisdom at the crossroads and in the halls of the Capitol and in church places and in your home saying to you, it's not quite time to loosen our caution. Because if we do, the society's most vulnerable will pay the price. And there's no economic value that you can place on a person's life, regardless of where they work, or where they're imprisoned, or where they're forced to live. In fact, the proverb that comes to my mind in a time like this is right at the end of Proverbs 31. That mother that's speaking to her son, she says this to him: "Speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." That's what a wise voice says. So my friends, these times are scary. Don't be overcome with fear, but be filled with boldness. Be filled with the voice of Lady Wisdom, who wants to cry out on behalf of the voiceless, the poor, the most vulnerable, and say that we will not begin to reopen because our checkbooks need it, our bank accounts need it, but we will use this time to double down on our care for those around us. We will adhere to the old proverbs like "do unto others, all others, as we would have them do to us." We will love our neighbor, all neighbors, as ourselves. That's wisdom, and that's what this time calls for. No matter what you hear from so much of the noise, remember, God gave you a brain. Use it. God gave you a heart. Use it to love boldly. Amen.